Welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all here. Big audience, excellent. I've got to give you some information before we start, mainly my name, so that when it all goes wrong, you know to blame Miro. Okay? So, my name is Paul Dark. I am, well, maybe of interest to you, I'm the chair of Mary Hill, Ward Labour Party in glorious Wolverhampton. So if you ever want to join a really good little Labour Party, move to Mary Hill and Wolverhampton. I'm Paul Dark, and equally I've got a kind of doctorate in disability, culture and crap like that, and stuff like that. So I'm Paul. So on my right is Simon McEwen, who is a legend, and I'll let you tell you why he's a legend later. And on my left we've got Janet Price, again, another legend, local as well. Simon's from Middlesbrough, I'm from Wolverhampton, from Liverpool. Someone's phone is going off. That's 1 point off your legendary status. But it doesn't harm me, I should probably turn my phone off as well. And again, get a notification, please turn your phones off, or at least put them on mute. One thing I would say, which I think is always good to say at these kind of events, is just put it on mute, but tweet and Facebook here, take pictures that we're here, preferably without flash, and tweet and all that, because that's really useful. Because you often get things and they say, oh, turn your phones off and pay attention. You don't have to pay attention, just tweet and Facebook and whatever. So and that we're really good, if we're really bad. So, and then further on my left is Julie Ward, MEP for
the whole of the Northwest.
The whole of the Northwest. There you go. There are others, but I don't think we should invite them. Is that true? Are they under another party?
Well, we've got 3 Labour MEPs in the Northwest.
3. That's impressive. It's better than the Midlands. And then at the end is Miro Griffiths, soon to be Dr. Miro Griffiths, but I don't want to preempt that. And we're here today to talk about disabled people as a catalyst for changing the perception and reality of the left. And I'll start by saying that I'll give a little thing about one thing that we could do, and hopefully you'll all agree with me. And I think the one thing we do need to do is applaud like that, so that they know that we're having as much fun as they are. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the last one. But I think one of the things I would say that we need to do is particularly for disabled people and how to change the perception of the left and everything, is to have a radical, and this is just off the top of my head, a radical transformation of an organisation such as the BBC, in the sense of relation to its expenditure, its coverage, and its inclusion of disabled people is woeful. Absolutely woeful.
Publicly funded.
Publicly funded, absolutely. And I think the thing is we've got to stop, particularly in relation to disabled people, setting quotas, setting kind of targets, and put new people in who do it. It's not a question of let's move towards this, let's move from 4% employees to 3, 5, 6, 7% employees. You move in with new people and you say, in a year, 20% of you will be disabled. A certain percentage, and it will be truly representative of the country. And another thing I would do to kind of counteract that kind of the bias within it, I would say the UK is 4 countries at the moment. That's another issue, I'm not going to go into that. And the money should be divided into 4, so that Ireland gets the same as England. And England will suffer from that. But actually, the other 3 have suffered from how it is done for the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And that's what we need to do, is overcompensate to create equality and justice. And there's little things I think that the left need to be agitating to do about how disabled people are. And one other thing I'm going to say, and this is a bit different as well. Another thing we need to do is create disabled peers. I'm against the Lords and peers, but I think we need to be putting disabled people in those positions so that their voice is heard, so that it's not a politician speaking for us, so that it's not, you know, a non-disabled person speaking for us. It's so that they're there in their voice. And equally, they'll then all vote to abolish themselves as well. But they'll have created that profile so that that voice is there. And that's just a couple of things that I've put out there. So now I'm going to stick to the running order. And my running order says Richard Reeser. But you will have noticed.
Sorry, he's here, but he's got stuck and he's coming.
Right. There you go. It's nice to see
I'm
you.
his partner.
Nice to see you. No, I remember.
I got here first. Sorry.
So he's. You don't want to speak for him, then?
No.
So he won't be first, obviously.
I'm not disabled.
And then, obviously, second is Marcia de Cordova, who isn't here either. She's the Shadow Minister for Disabled People. Is that right?
I saw her earlier.
Very shadow. So we have one perspective on the position there anyway. So we're going to go straight. We'll miss those two. We'll come back to Richard, and we will go straight to the third one on my list, who is excellent in my view, and I will hand you over to Miro.
Hello everybody. Hello.
Hello.
So I'm just going to speak for about 5 minutes or so. And what I want to do with my 5 minutes really is just to ask people in the room to reflect and consider their actions and how they contribute towards either the oppression of disabled people or the emancipation of disabled people. And the reason why I say that is because it's our daily actions that contribute towards the extensive marginalisation that disabled people experience on a day-to-day basis. And if we look at it in terms of the UK as a whole, well, our current government show complete and utter disregard for the lives of disabled people. We've seen that in terms of the United Nations Committee, highlighting the human catastrophe facing disabled people, and yet the response by the UK government is just to dismiss it. We have legislation, we have United Nations charters and committees that provide us with frameworks for how to realise disabled people's inclusion within society, and yet the reality on the ground is nowhere near reflecting that. And what I think is fascinating, we can look at the excellent work by the likes of Disability News Service and other academics and activist networks and user-led organisations that demonstrate the examples that highlight the barriers and the marginalisation that people experience. And that's reflected in terms of disabled people facing or experiencing such hostility and violence when trying to access support, the correlations between death and assessment procedures, and so on. But what I think is fascinating is when we look at, for example, when activists put up clips, YouTube clips, social media clips of them experiencing intolerance and marginalisation, and yet everybody around them just goes by. You see people being denied access to transport, of being distressed because of engagement with medical professionals and so on, and yet the media doesn't highlight it, yet people scrutinise and try to demonstrate hostility. And even in those social situations, people just walk past and ignore it. And what I think we need to do is consider how do we ensure that people politicise their own experiences. And that's really the key message from me, is to say, how do we do that? How do we ensure that people place their everyday experiences within a broader historical and societal context to illustrate that when they do face marginalisation, they don't necessarily absorb it or internalise it. They recognise that they are experiencing something which is part of a much broader social structure that seeks to fragment us, that seeks to challenge us, and seeks to ensure that we are silenced when we're trying to actually have a voice. So the need to politicise people's experiences is essential within this. And by that, what I mean is that I want to see more people being involved in activism and social movements. And we can talk about the need, for example, of having spaces for people to come together and reflect, disabled people's assemblies. Historically, we've had that, but much of that has been lost due to austerity cuts and due to other issues that many people have talked about. But what I want is to think about how do we form a collective resistance which offers a vision for the future. And what I mean by that is I recognise that many of our activities and campaigns are in the here and now. We are trying to prevent the violence, the destruction of life, the further institutionalisation and marginalisation. And whilst that's no fault, but we are permanently stuck in the crisis-driven agendas. And yet we don't have enough of a vision for what do we mean by a safer, inclusive, accessible environment and society. Where is the vision that we can offer to everybody to say, this is what society should be built like? We don't have that, and the right continue to fragment us, to take away the resources, so we end up fighting each other. And what I'm grappling with, and what I would like us just to think about, perhaps in the audience discussion later on, and after this talk as well, is how do we have that space to build that vision for an alternative way of being and functioning, which ensures that human rights and social justice aren't conditional on the basis of economic development and political objectives. Because disabled people's experiences illustrate how it's so easy to roll back on the advancements that have been gained by many activists and groups. Because our social justice and human rights are conditional. They are based on whether they meet the economic and political objectives of the state. So we cannot just rely on rights. We also have to have a vision that we can offer to other people. And that's where I think I would like to start with engagement, now and in the future. So thank you for your time.
Is this microphone? Yes, it is. What I'm going to do is we are going to have a couple of questions after each talk, but because I know Richard is going to go somewhere else afterwards, I'm going to let him talk now, and then we'll have a couple of questions about the both of them, if that's okay. So if you could give the microphone to Richard for me for a moment. This is Richard Greta, big in disability education, etc. He'll let you tell you about it.
Yeah, I was going to make my comments a little wider this time, because I think I agree with what Miro said, that the strength of the movement determines what rights we get, and our movement has been moved back a long way, both here and internationally, and we're living on borrowed time of other people's campaigns which set up, for instance, representation at an international level here and so on. But as the recent arguments around the Global Summit on Disability, which the government tried to hold as a smokescreen for their castigation by the UN Committee in Geneva, being the only country in the world that is now held to special measures on their breach of human rights of disabled people, the only country in the world that is held to account every year now for what they haven't done. So it was quite interesting seeing the disability movement, what remains of it, mainly through Deepak and Rafa, trying to challenge the government. And what I hope we can establish in the next year or two is at least to start with, for international affairs, one voice for disabled people in this country. And I think that's very important because it was, after all, the disabled people's movement started in the 70s and on into the 80s, through your Pius and then into the British Council of Disabled People, later the UK DPC, that made the running on a global scale and led to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which covers more than 1 billion people. But what I notice in engaging with that, it's a hollow. There's nothing there when you actually push it. There are a few people who have got their careers carved out of this, but a mass movement isn't there at the moment. We have to build it. And it has to be a representative mass movement, both here and around the world. Because after all, it's no good the UN saying that accessibility is a fundamental human right, which they do say now. So there's no excuse for there being no access. That's a breach of human rights when it's not done. But we don't have the strength to implement it. So we have to build the strength both here and abroad. And the issue that I'm most concerned about is developing inclusive education for all children and young people around the world, which is an undertaking in the Sustainable Development Goal that by 2030 every young person will have access to a quality education. That's every young person. It's not everyone apart from those with autism, or apart from those who don't speak, or apart from those who are deaf, or apart from those with cerebral palsy, or no, all. So how do we get to that? I believe the only way we'll get to that is by actually building a mass movement again around the world which represents us. So 8 years ago I was the representative here for the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, which covered 500 million people across the Commonwealth. It was quite effective when it lasted. We couldn't get it funded, and then there were too many egos in there, particularly one person who basically blocked the whole thing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, he died in February, so I now think we can move forward and move the whole thing forward. And the problem is, in our movement, egos do make a difference, and we all have big egos, even to have got where we are talking from the stage here, because it's a hard, uphill struggle to get yourself heard as a disabled person. But we have to have solidarity with each other, we have to have agreed goals, and it seems to me that the time has come to start that discussion about how we rebuild our movement here, but also, as we were the leaders on a world scale, we have a responsibility to all those disabled people around the world to ensure that the things that we fought for and won in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, not perfect, but it is a bastion of human rights which, if implemented, and incidentally Labour is committed to the full implementation of that, so that will mean that we have a framework of rights far stronger than the Equalities Act, because there are many, many things in there which are not covered by the Equalities Act. So that's my message is, please, if people want to do that, let's find a way of going forward to, first of all, join up here, join up across the country with a common cause, and then to our brothers and sisters abroad so we can help them. Thank you.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Someone at the back. You say it, I can hear it, and then I'll say it out again. Or no, just going to give you a microphone. Here you go.
Gratulacje, microphones.
I've got them both. Oh, greedy.
Who's the question from?
If you say your name and then your question.
My name's Kendrick Fowler. When I was listening to Richard, when I was in school in the early 90s,
Yeah.
I was learning disabilities, and people with learning disabilities were basically separated from the main classroom. I'm just wondering if you know that's still the case, or if the schools are now more inclusive for people with learning disabilities.
So the question was, is basically segregated education still a big thing? Richard?
Yeah, unfortunately, with the austerity measures and cutbacks in funding in schools and the privatisation of the school system with academies, it's worse. There are more children excluded, the numbers in special school is at the highest level ever, and academies are actually closing things that did work. Resource bases and units are being shut at a great rate of knots. The secondaries closed, 20% of them closed last year. Basically, those heads don't want disabled kids in their school. Even when they're bright and able to pass 11 pluses, they still don't want kids on the autistic spectrum, for instance, in their school. So there's widespread prejudice and discrimination when we, on paper, say we've got to pay a system where everybody can be educated together. Labour is committed to that. It's going to be a hard role to get there, but we're doing a reference back this afternoon, which will be the first step on it to make it absolutely clear that our education policy is based on the principle of inclusion. From that we can build it to deal with all those issues.
Anybody else got a question? Oh, someone there. If someone take the microphone, if you again give us your name and then your question.
Hello, my name's Sandra. Obviously hearing about the Conventions of Rights of Disabled People in terms of the Equality Act, I mean obviously it's a very different perception, isn't it? It's coming from a very, very different place. And I'm just wondering if people have got any idea about how we start to make that a more prominent, obviously, piece of legislation, rather than the conventional stuff that the government would put out, like the Equalities Act and the Care Act and so on.
Okay, I think Miro could give us some wise words on that.
Marsha's come.
Well, I think a good starting point would is to recognise that the majority of disabled people have never come across the UNCLPD, United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So there is a major need to actually recognise that when people are facing injustice, there are these opportunities that will facilitate the inclusion of disabled people, that provide the guidance, for example, in terms of the UNCLPD's general comments on different articles, that can provide us with examples as to how to advance action within our local and national frameworks in order to push forward. But what I would say as well is that I am concerned by when we discuss rights, rights always tend to be in a discussion around conditional issues. For example, so when I'm sure Richard will want to say something on this as well, but when we had discussions around the UNCRPD ratification in the UK, there were reservations placed on numerous articles. And yet there is a general acceptance within society to actually have discussions as to whether we want to place restrictions on the inclusion of certain groups within society. And so, yeah, what I want to see us do is actually challenge that and challenge the normative practices that actually suggest that exclusion of certain groups is acceptable. And to do that, we need to actually, as I said before in my 5 minutes, it's to take that conversation outside those of our networks and circles that we frequently discuss with. Because it's very easy for us to speak to those who already acknowledge the marginalisation of disabled people and accept that it's an injustice and it needs to be challenged. The question is, how do we offer an alternative vision for the way society is organised to those who are happy or content to actually have a two-tier education system, or are happy and content with disabled people being trapped in their homes because assessment procedures don't actually acknowledge the support needs of the individuals. So really, I want to see more pressure being done to not only raise awareness so people recognise that this is actually there and can actually campaign for it, but also to challenge the extensive effect that has gone on for so long, which says fundamentally that exclusion and segregation of certain groups is acceptable and should be discussed in our society.
Okay, thanks for that, Miro. I know because Marsha, do you want to speak next as you don't have a lot of time?
But the next speaker can give it.
Okay, so the next speaker I'll hand over now to Janet Price.
Hello, it's really nice to be here. I'm going to pick up from the things that Marsha and Richard have been talking about, because I want to talk both about how we deal with prejudice and discrimination that disabled people face on a daily level.
Yeah.
Is it on? Can you hear me? My voice is very loud, so if I disappear, wave a hand. But also the issues that Richard has been raising about looking at this work on a global scale rather than just locally. There are 1 billion of us around the world. That is not small numbers. We ought to be out there in force and fighting, and I don't understand why our voice isn't heard more loudly. And if you add to that voice of the disabled people, the people who are alongside us, supporting us, that should be 2 billion, 3 billion, 5 billion. So what happens? I think one of the things that, we're also familiar with the negative stereotypes we face. the Daily Mail has been very good at establishing us as scroungers, and if we're not scroungers, we're hopeless and helpless. So one way or another, we're really not much use to society. But I think it's interesting to look at the different models we have for understanding disability. It's clear that there's the sort of welfare model, the medical model, and then we've worked so hard within the disability community to push the social model of understanding disability, so that people are really looking not at our impairments, but at the discrimination, the prejudice, the lack of access. And I think that's a crucial thing to continue to focus on, because people do not understand that, they don't get it. But beyond that, for me, I think we're talking about social model, it's about the cultural ways in which disability works in the world. And so we have to recognise that our bodies, our social context, the world around us, all of those are formed. I'm one of 3 sisters with multiple sclerosis. All of us have emerged in that struggle very differently in terms of how we deal with it, because we're different people, so our cultural response to it and our cultural construction through our bodies is very different. So I think we can't say bodies are not part of the social model, because they are as much affected by the society we live in as anything else. They're not simply this medical, separated thing. So I really would like to put those back into the mix. I also think it's interesting, we look at the UN Convention and it says very clearly disability is a cultural thing. It doesn't have a neat list of what disabilities are around the globe. It says disability depends on where you live. So in one country, albinism will be a serious disability. In another country, autism will. But they might not be included in others' lists. So this is something that is very locally determined and will be understood differently. And we have to get our heads around that on a global level, we're looking at different ways of understanding and comprehending how disability emerges. But we're doing all of this in the context of a worsening neoliberal situation. And one of the things that is happening because of that, the increasing inequalities, the worsening work context that people are facing, the worsening living context. And I'm very interested in where we put the really large numbers of people. For example, from the war in Yemen or Syria, we have a whole generation of young people who have grown up without enough food, so they won't have grown, their brains will have got stymied at some level and won't have developed. Now, they may not fall into a nice, neat disability definition, but there is something really serious that's happened to them, and they will face the prejudice and discrimination in society because of the things they can't achieve. And there's a word being floating around, which is debility. And I think this has interesting connotations, because there's serious problems with how debility has been understood. But we've got a very large group of people who aren't disabled, but they are by no means living at the full scope of good health and good context in society. And where do we put them, and how do we engage them in this struggle? Because that's billions of people, and it's growing. You know, our parents with dementia, where do they come? You know, they're disabled, but as they move down that road, the beginnings of it, they won't be disabled because they haven't got there yet. You know, it's that slide, and we can't work out where it goes. And I think there's conversations we need to have. I don't know what the answer is, but I deeply think there's conversation we need to have about this. Moving on from that, I want to say, what can we do to make a difference? And I would say arts, arts, arts. Every time I'm passionate about the role that arts, you can see I've got everything on the floor, the role that arts can play in making a change for disabled people. I think I'm a member of Dada Fest, the Disability and Deaf Arts organisation in Liverpool, but I've seen right around the world. In India, there are groups now setting up Merchants of Madness festivals. You know, festivals that are really dealing with psychosocial things, with people hearing voices, people with deep levels of stress, really trying to work and look at how poetry, at how theatre, and how creativity can really make a difference to these people, for understanding what is happening to them and understanding their place in society and what they have to offer. You know, same is happening in South Africa. There's great groups working there. There's a woman called Marlene Leroux. She set up a really interesting project with women, disabled women who'd faced violence. And she just got the best photographers, the best makeup artists. I mean, not my style, but she got them allowances for clothes, and they dressed up, and they felt, one woman said, she said, I felt like a princess on that day. I never thought I would. And she wept, because somebody had actually made her feel good about living in the body in which she lived, rather than the prejudice she constantly faced about it. And the film of that has spread around the world and has been a point for discussion. You know, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's about what does happen to disabled people who face such extreme levels of violence, and then who felt that negativity you feel about yourself when you've experienced violence, when you feel a sense that your body is worth nothing. How do you come back from that? This was one way. There's many other ways, and arts play a central role in that. Dada Fest has a festival here this year, all throughout November. I'm going to wave a leaflet at you if you're in Liverpool. If you're not in Liverpool, come back anyway. It'll be great, or it'll be on the web. Lots happening, and we are working globally. So, as Richard said, this really matters. There's global connections that we make. Dada Fest is a global festival, and we pull in people from all over the world. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to do again, let another person speak before we have a couple of questions. So I shall ask Marsha if she'll speak now, if that's all right. Thanks for being here, and let it go.
I've lost my voice, so you have to bear with me today. Hello everyone, I'm really pleased to be here, and I just want to extend thanks to the World Transformed for actually putting on this event. This is pretty much the only event for disabled people. Unfortunately, in the conference or on the conference hall or conference floor, there isn't much for disabled people. So I'm really thrilled to actually be here. So when we were first talked about, you know, the event that was going to happen today, it was really about what the left should and could be doing. But I think before we can think about that, we pretty much have to look at the state of affairs for disabled people now. And I'm certain most people in this room would actually agree that what's happened for disabled people is nothing more or nothing short of what is a hostile environment that has been created by this Tory government, who have been hell-bent on demonising disabled people for the last 8 years, and that is just reflected through the policies and the decisions and the choices that they have taken, believing that the disabled people's voices can't be heard, and they have done that through suppressing our voices, but also through dismantling the welfare state, also through cuts to local government and to services locally, dismantling the voluntary sector and disabled people's led organisations. Make no mistake, that's all been part of their long-term plan and their strategy. There's no question about that, and that is austerity, and that's what it has done, which is why I'm so thrilled that we are having the conversation today. If we think about it, just 2 years ago, at the UN committee, and I am not going to use the full title, I'm going to use the Committee for the Rights of Disabled People, because I believe that is the terminology that should be used. And when they said that the Tory government's policies systematically violated the rights of disabled people, and when their chair said that it was a human catastrophe, that is no joke. And I said it at a fringe earlier today. This government should be ashamed, but they are not ashamed. And I will say this, I blame the last Labour leadership for that, because they chose not to be the voice for the voiceless.
In the WTO.
I will come to that, but they chose not to be the voice for the voiceless. And that is why I sit here and say I will do my very best to be your voice, because I believe our voice needs to still be heard. Remember, 3 years ago, the Labour leadership voted against preventing cuts to social security for disabled people. It's shocking that that happened, but believe me, I was there, it did happen. But I know under the leadership of Jeremy and John, we have supporters and we have those voices that will keep that flame alight for us and ensure that we will build a society and build a Britain that genuinely is for the many and not for the few. And that is so fundamental. And you all know that you have the support of Jeremy and John. I know we have the support of Jeremy and John in all that we do. But if we think about some of the issues that have taken place and some of the cuts that have taken place, it has taken High Court rulings for the government to actually stop what they are doing. There was the PIP and now the PIP legal judgment. That said that the government's policies were blatantly discriminating against disabled people. It was the brave people that took the government again to court for universal credit and the removal of the severe disability premium. This is essential financial support to ensure that we can all live independently. But it was the High Court that had to say no. And it wasn't Labour and opposition that allowed this, because had they have been affected back then, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in today. Already this year, the government are having to undertake 5 reviews because of their hostile environment policies, which is outrageous, and you all know that it is outrageous. But you know, there is a light at the end of that tunnel, because Labour in government will ensure that we incorporate the UN Conventions for Persons with a Disability into domestic legislation, so that we can travel and use public transport, so that we can access the social security system, so that we can go into work and stay in work. And we have to, and we will aim to try and remove those barriers to discrimination when in work. And that is so important. We have to look at removing the access to work cap, because it's an arbitrary cap and it isn't actually causing or helping anybody. And we all agree that we believe in an inclusive education system, and I know that Richard has done stellar work in this area, because it's important. Because growing up for me, if my mother didn't fight to keep me in mainstream education, she had to take on the local education authority back then. And if she didn't fight to keep me in mainstream education, they would have put me in a special school. And comrades, I can tell you, had she had lost that fight, I know I wouldn't be sat here today. I wouldn't be a member of parliament, and I certainly would not be the shadow minister for disabled people. So I am very grateful for all that she has done, and I will keep that flame and keep that fight for an inclusive education for all, because it is so important. So one key area as well is about participation, and it's about being able to access voting and being able to take part in elections. Because I believe at the moment I am just one of 6 defining disabled people in Parliament. That is not enough. I am there and I am facing so many barriers, but I will face those barriers, friends, because I want to ensure anybody, any of you, anyone that wants to come into politics, come into Parliament behind me, won't have to endure those barriers. And we need more socialists in the Labour movement, but also in Parliament, because the Parliamentary Labour Party, there are only a few of us, and we need more. So opening up politics to people and actually opening up access to elected office for people is so crucial, and it's so important. All of the democratic parts of the Labour Party need to be open and need to be more inclusive. And I know I've kind of went off a bit there and moved away from the hostile environment stuff. But what I just want to kind of finish on ultimately is You know what? Labour was the only party in the general election last year to produce a manifesto with and for disabled people. Nothing about you, without you. And it's my job to continue to build on that, to ensure that social security isn't just seen as some form of, this benefits. The social security system is a safety net. It is there for those who need it, and it is there for us all in our times of need. The social security system should also be viewed in the same light as the National Health Service. That is how important it is, and that is how fundamental it is to ensure that people can live independently. The next Labour government will scrap all of the assessments for the work capability and also for personal independence payment. You know that. Labour government will also be scrapping the punitive sanctions regimes because they do not work, and frankly, they should have never been introduced for disabled people in the first place. And that's the fact. But for my final thing.
Make it the final one.
It will be my final one. But what I will say, next month is going to be the 10th anniversary since the introduction of ESA and the Work Capability Assessment. And yes, I know it was a Labour government. It was the new Labour government that introduced it. But believe me, after the election of the coalition government, they made the Work Capability Assessment even worse. And we do know it has caused pain, misery, and in many cases, death and suicide. And believe me, I again will be fighting to ensure that we right that wrong and right those injustices that have taken place for the disabled people. Solidarity to you all, and thank you. Thank you once again for having me.
Thank you.
I want to say one thing to Marsha goes, because the trade union movement was quicker than the Labour Party to take up disability issues, people like yourself, Marsha, actually got empowered through the trade unions and then came into the Labour Party. For anyone here not committed, join your union and join your local Labour Party. That's where the battle is going on now. I'm giving out 2 bits of paper, one about the SEN and another one about what's going on globally. Thank you.
Thank you. So, there's a sudden rush of X's there. So, anybody have any questions for the 2 people leaving and one there? So, who's going to hand the microphone down? Because I can see the person who wants.
I think a question.
There you go.
First of all, I'd like to have a word to, is it Paul?
Richard.
Richard, I beg your pardon. I was in mainstream schools teaching laws where I was grandiosely thrown out and bullied, quite frankly, and told not to talk about it, but taught very many able and gifted artists. One who went on to an art college, she believed she had autism. She was also severely dyslexic. And I used to say, what do you see? And she'd say, I just see a load of lines. Marks on the paper. But verbally, the exam board would not let her take, and it's like an amusement where she spoke it. Both me and the head of the department fought for that child to speak her A-level, and there were 2 other people who became teachers, but they weren't disabled in that way. And she was splendid, she could have spoken it. And she'd tell me when I was in primary school, the teacher used to shit. I always had my hand up and I could verbally express myself. She said, and she'd be stupid. That child was told, you were stupid. But try to address this lady. My husband's disabled and I love him. And this point about anyone can be disabled at any time. Anyone can get an illness, anyone can get old. That has to be, you were talking about, like, how do we push ourselves? How do we make ourselves miserable? How do we get angry? Well, it sounds terrible, but use their tools. Look at the number of disabled people. You've got like people like Stevie Wonder, Ian Drury, who wrote terrific songs about disability. You've got people like Frida Kahlo. She's almost a goddess. She's become iconised in art galleries. They've done it before. You should have done it before. The art galleries did it and got in there. And this thing about people in sport, not every disabled person is going to be able to run round the track. So that people are actually cheating in and saying, making run. That shouldn't happen. You know, there's just so much I could say as I'm saying non-disabled person, but you can't see inside my head, so there you go. It's a perception, and you've really got to shove it down people's throats.
Absolutely.
But I am computer stupid, but there's many young people here who are so savvy and computer literate and so good with imagery. Use them, get them, make the government give them money to. And another 2 children I found who was sketching a friend of mine who had, sadly he's dead now, Huntington's chorea, and people tended to think he was drunk. And I took them to one side, and when I explained it, they said, "Oh, we're sorry, mate," because it's not expressed in schools, because that education has been dumbed down, because people are fighting, you know, for everyone to be the very best person they can be. Whoever they are, I just feel so strongly about it. I'm sorry.
No,
it's a bit
all right.
inarticulate.
It's all right.
My heart.
But we are going to move on, but thank you very much. There's a question over there. I'm going to say goodbye to Richard, because Richard's off. Thank you for coming. And top of the stairs there.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thanks for coming. And I'm getting you ask your question. Say your name. That'll be
My
very
name
nice.
is Grindle.
And
I'm an immigrant. So what are you going to do about it? But anyway, one of my questions is towards the aid agencies who are working overseas, and particularly in war zones. And we don't actually hear, if we're talking about international collaboration and working together on an international level, there seems to be quite a large silence at aid level in terms of how many people are increasingly becoming disabled because of war, because of violence. We hear it as though they're just this one huge population of refugees and people, but I think there is an tip of the iceberg in terms of what we know and understand about levels of disability and how much of that disability is coming from violence and war in different countries across the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to respond just very briefly to both of those, to you. I want to say there's a lot of great work going on with young disabled people. I will agree that it's appalling the way that the special schools are coming back. They're sort of thriving, but not, if you see what I mean. Their numbers are increasing, but young people are not getting a great education in them. However, there are really exciting possibilities around. I mean, Dada Fest, Miro was part of this, runs a programme called Young Rookies, which has a whole bunch of really bright, really smart young disabled people in it, and they put on shows at the Phil and at the Everyman every year, and they're creative, they do work with local museums, they're constantly creating new ideas, new challenges. I mean, one of the last things that came out from one of the special schools last year was a song around the Equalities Act and the UNCRPD, and it was a song just challenging people as to why they didn't listen to what the convention said, and why they didn't listen to what young disabled people were saying. And it was a great song, it ought to be everywhere. So there's material like that coming out, and it's happening, but it's slow. There's a programme called CRIPOP, working with young disabled people around the world, and it's a guy from America who's linked together people from this country, from the Africas, making their own music, making their own disabled hip-hop, and that's been really powerful. Just on the question of refugees and disability, it is appalling. The numbers aren't, but the numbers aren't counted of disabled people within war zones even before the impact of the war itself. I've been working with a friend from the Cameroon, and she's had to become a refugee, but we've worked a lot with friends of hers still back in the country, and they say that there, disabled women are being burnt in their own homes because there is nobody to help them leave. and everybody runs away and they are left behind. And there's an inability to see this from the agencies and from the people that should be out there offering support. So there's a really scary level of ignorance and really, again, discrimination against disabled people in war zones.
Thank you for that. You want to ask a question up there? Could you hold it 1 second, actually, because I'm going to let Julie speak first. So we're just going to let the next speaker speak. We are running out of time, but I will come back to you, I promise. And if I don't, shout at me. So I'll hand you over to...
Okay, I'll stand up because I speak better when I stand up. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the North West now, but I actually am a poet and I'm a theatre maker, and I worked running an arts and disability organisation across the whole of the north of England for a few years. And I've, within the European Parliament, I'm a link MEP with the UN CRPD on the Culture and Education Committee. And so it's wonderful for me to be here and to listen to people, how people keep talking about the importance of arts and culture as a tool for social change, as a tool for communication, as a mechanism, I think, by which the movement can both understand the context and also express demands. I think that's really important. I want to tell you 2 stories. Before I was elected, the summer before, I went to the Edinburgh Festival and I answered a call out from the comedian Mark Thomas. I think that's the guy, isn't it? Yeah. And because he was doing this 100 acts of minor dissent, and the call out in Edinburgh was to go and basically camp outside the ATOS HQ and to assess ATOS's ability to assess. Okay. It was a really incredible action, and there were people there from all over, local people, but people who come as tourists and visitors. The disability community was out there, very angry grannies were there as well, and it was good humoured. And he then incorporated the results of those actions into the shows that he then toured around the country. And I'm very proud that I took part in that, and I constantly refer back to it when I think about my political journey, because we might get elected, maybe we're going to end up as councillors or MPs, MEPs, police and crime commissioners, but we should never forget those of us who are activists, that we're activists first and foremost, and that's where we always have to be. We have to always go back to our activist roots, wherever we end up in our political journeys. The other story is in my community that I was living in. I was living in an ex-Coalfield community, Labour Council, I'm not going to say who, where or anything. They decided to bring in participatory budgeting. Some of you might know about it. It's a Brazilian model, it's supposed to be very inclusive. And what they did was to choose to put on the participatory budgeting exercise in a venue that was not accessible. And it happened on a day when it snowed. And groups of disabled people had put forward their own projects that day to be voted upon for some of the funding. And of course, they couldn't get there. They couldn't get there because the weather was really bad, because the transport system's really crap, okay? And the venue itself was not properly accessible. And I called out that council on the basis of the equality duty for what they did. And I had to call them out because the disabled community themselves are so bloody exhausted from the process of just trying to get by each day that when I was saying, shall we do something about this, they were going, no, just let it go, just let it go. And I think what I've learned is that we, people like me, have to stand by people whose lives are so, like the time it takes up to do all this ridiculous bureaucracy in order just to get what you should be getting in order to survive, means that people don't have the energy and the resources, the time, the ability, the money to do the things that need to be done. So I think it's very important that we are prepared to be in solidarity and to do what it takes. this othering that has happened, which is really scary. We're finding right across the world that all our rights are being attacked. So we have to stand in solidarity with other people whose rights are being attacked, so the LGBT community, women, children, refugees. I think it's really important that we do that. But intersectionality is also really important. So I've been really proud in the European Parliament, for example, to welcome a group of disabled women to an event that my brilliant femme Gypsy Romani MEP friend Soraya from Sweden hosted. So this is how I met the Sisters of Frida, by the way. I didn't meet them in the UK, I met them when they came out to the European Parliament. And to understand the multiple forms of discrimination that people experience when they identify as many other. Okay, and that's really important. I don't think, obviously, this government doesn't get it at all. They absolutely do not understand. They're trying to put everybody in a box, and they want to keep you in that box. They want to divide all of us. But we have to find ways of coming together wherever people are being oppressed. You know, and if it's good for disabled people, it's good for us. So if we make policy that's good for disabled people, then it's good for all of us. We have to understand that. I work on the FEM committee as well as the Education and Culture committee, and I know that if we make good policy for women, it's good for men too. So we have to be saying these aren't just for a section of society. This is about all of us at the end of the day. Just to talk a little bit about war and disaster. I'm a MEP on the delegation for relations with Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries, and also Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo. So I work in war-torn communities as a representative for the European Parliament, and I was in Haiti last December, and there had been no provision for disabled people whatsoever in Haiti. Then they had the earthquake. Then they understood they had to do something, because suddenly they had a huge proportion of people in their society, from all levels of society, who were suddenly not able to do their jobs, to access the services, to move around. So the sector, if you like, they got organised, and they have managed to do a really canny thing, which is that they've put their disability organisation into the government office. That's where they are. Right? Then they're never quite sure whether or not they're going to be able to continue. But they've got all that learning, they've stuck it inside the government office. As well as war and conflict, we've got terrible situations, for example, in Palestine and Kashmir, where the forces are using gas canisters, pellet guns in Kashmir, and we're seeing that people, for example, in Kashmir, young people being blinded by the pellet guns. And I've certainly been to villages in Palestine where people are now lifetime wheelchair users as a result of the conflict and the violence that they've experienced. In the EU, we use the social model. I'm really proud that that's what my parliament does. The social model of disability came from the EU. And we are going to be under attack from this Tory government if we come out of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And as our government is deciding that it wants to water down our rights and take away our rights, okay, the EU is making more progressive legislation all the time about disability. Not just about disability, but last year in Gothenburg, at the Gothenburg Summit, which we were not at because apparently we're not doing social policy anymore, the social pillar for the EU was adopted. So the EU will progress on all these matters and we will row back. So I'd like to see our leadership fight Brexit for your sake, for the sake of disabled people. Never without us should include paid consultancies for disabled people. I'm fed up with focus groups that ask disabled people to come and give their advice about how things should be done. People who are experts and experts of their own experiences should be paid for that, okay? That's a job. Consultancies are great, aren't they? Everybody's putting money into consultancies. But when it comes to the real people who are experiencing those situations, who are fighting those battles, they need to be paid for their experience. We've got something called SDG Watch. Who was asking about the schools? SDG Watch, okay? So SDG Watch means that we've got a network of civil society organisations who are watching to see whether or not the work that we're doing within the European Parliament and within the EU fulfills and ticks the SDGs. So we've got a watch on it with a civil society organisation. I'm concerned about hierarchies within the disability field. I don't very often see people with learning disabilities at any of the events that I'm at, but we do support disabled people in the European Parliament. We had brilliant meetings with learning disabled there, and we have assemblies for disabled people. We are having a university in February. Sorry, it's called a university, but it's not. If you want to know more about that and how you could come to that, it's just a big event in the European Parliament for all kinds of oppressed people who are suffering from poverty and deprivation. And the Erasmus Plus programme has been an incredible programme, not just for clever middle-class students who would be going abroad anyway, but it has supported loads and loads of disabled young people to come across borders. And one of them is an amazing group of students from Stockport with autism who took part in an Erasmus Plus programme, and subsequent to that have set up their businesses, have got work experience placements, are doing all sorts of amazing things. Now that's not happening to them here in the UK, right? With our government doing that. That's happening because the EU is fighting for that for all young people. And we've got so little understanding in this country about what the EU gives us. Right? And I have heard even Labour MPs talk about the Erasmus programme as if it's just something for students wanting to go off and get PhDs. No harm meant, Miro. But it's the plus bit on Erasmus Plus. It's for all the others. It's for all the hard-to-reach kids, all the deprived kids, all the people who would never have those opportunities. So we must stand up for those. Right, finish there.
All right.
Right.
Thank you. One quick question for the guy in we'll come back to that in a minute, but the guy in the red at the back was next up the top there. And then I'm going to have the final speaker, and then we've got two questions from over here. Okay?
I just wanted to ask about the difference, it's sort of 2 points, but the first point is the difference between visible disability and non-visible disability. And I think it's easier to spot discrimination against visible disability than it is against non-visible disability. And that kind of feeds into the second point, which is sometimes I feel like disabled people, for disabled people, it's or people with disabilities, it's difficult to form romantic relationships with people who aren't part of the disabled community because of sort of understood discrimination on different ways of thinking. And it's in a sense forms a sort of social Darwinism in that it means that